Today we're going to talk about the lamb leg. Now, most of the time when you order lamb leg, you order it two ways. One is semi-boneless and one is boneless. Semi-boneless, we normally will take out the H-bone. The H-bone's here. That's actually your hip bone. We remove that bone because if we didn't, when you're cutting, it's actually very tough to cut through that, and it actually makes it hard to carve the actual leg. So some fun tips we'll go over today is firstly, how to debone and take out the semi-bone off the hip. How to bone out a lamb leg. We'll talk about the different parts of lamb leg. We have the actual hip end, and then we have the lower leg end and the shank end. Some people really like the shank end. And then we'll talk about how to cook it. So the first step in removing the actual H-bone. I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to hold it in a way, we call this the pistol grip. Imagine if there was a chamber there, we have the pistol here. This is known as the basic grip, but we're going to use the pistol grip here. We're going to take our knife, we're just going to angle it this way towards the bone. And you'll hear scraping, that's actually super ideal. I'm taking my knife, I'm just letting the tip of my knife guide me. I'm not letting the knife float at all. And the whole time I'm kind of pulling back at the meat to make sure that I'm getting the maximum yield off this actual roast. So as you can see there, I now have this ability to see with how the bone's shaped. There's a joint here, right in there. I'm going to actually make sure that my knife comes inwards, comes up, and when I get to that joint, I use the tip of my knife and go right, separate that edge too. That socket has really got a lot of connective tissue in between to make sure it stays in place. So this is the part you want to take your time on. You don't want to rush just because it's one of the most trickiest parts of removing this H-bone. We're spelling H-bone A-I-T-C-H. Now I'm taking my knife and I'm angling up towards the bone the whole time. If I have it anywhere other angle, it's going to cause me to lose a lot of meat. And as I'm doing this, I'm starting at the top. I'm really making sure I stay super close to that bone. There's a little nugget here. And again, my tip of my knife's going right underneath that bone, angled up. It's almost like lifting it up, and I'm angling it really, really aggressively up towards the bone. So as I'm doing this, there's actually a little bit of it's almost like a little bit of bone that kind of protrudes out. And I'm just going to go around that and I'm come back inwards and come right up. Using my knife. Any meat I see, I'm just trying to make sure I keep that with the actual leg. You're not going to get all of it, but the trick is there's a nugget of meat. Almost looks like a loin chop. That's because that's where the loin chop was actually last cut off. I'm going to make sure that I actually take that little bit of meat there and I take it off with the leg. The way to do that is to cut downward towards it. There's a bone there, so you won't be able to get all of it, but for the most part, you can get a little chunk of it. Kind of scrape it out a little bit. That's a good sound of hair. And then I'm going to take out the rest of the H-bone. Now, if you don't know where you're going, stay with the bone. That's just fat, connective tissue there. Come back inwards, kind of pulling on the bone a bit so I can see where I'm going. Feel with your hands, you'll notice there's that little bit of tailbone, a little under vertebrae there. Okay, so that's my H-bone. I really was being really cautious to get all that meat off there. There is going to be a little bit of meat left. You can always go back and get that meat out with the tip of your knife. Use it for sausages, things like that. Stew meat, no waste over here. This bone is a harder bone, so really ideal if you have a dog, you want to cut it up, and you can give it to your dog as a snack. Harder bones tend to work well with that, scapula, things like that. So that'll go to the side for now. Now I'm left with the leg with the H-bone removed. There's a layer of connective tissue there. I'm just going to take my knife and actually trim that right off. There's a little fat nugget there. I'm just pushing, I'm not cutting, I'm just kind of slightly pushing. And that comes right off. And then I have a couple of things that I'm going to do first. So first I have this layer of connective tissue here. You can almost see it. It's right on top of, this is the flank steak here. So I'm actually going to go in there with my hand and just kind of, you can see I'm lightly pushing to separate it. There's some connective tissue there. If you're having a little trouble, you can kind of just pull on it like that. If it's really ripping the meat, all you have to do is simply use your knife without cutting into the other side. Now, the cool part about that is this can start and help me remove what we call the felt. Now the felt is an outer membrane that kind of can be very bitter and sour at the same time, so I tend to remove that. Sometimes you get it all in one fell swoop, sometimes you don't. But you can start over if you kind of find yourself not where you want to be. This little nugget of fat comes off, so I'll make a shape here. This will help me find my felt again. The felt goes all the way around to the other side, so this is a hard thing to remove. It doesn't have to be super perfect, just take your time on it. Long, clean strokes do help. I'm starting this side here, now I have the ability to remove the rest of that felt, and I'm actually going to start by just make sure I'm as far up as I can go on that, and then long, clean strokes. And I'm pulling on the felt as I'm going. That's going to allow me to really remove the whole thing. Sometimes you do cut through it, that's fine. Don't stress about it, just start over. But it is super thin, and you can see that as soon as I remove that felt, the meat is exposed, so I have to be cautious not to cut into that meat. See, I just cut through mine. That's fine. Start picking it up again slightly, make sure I get underneath that. I just start over. Now the cool part is towards the hip end, this bigger end here, there is a lot of fat, so you're going to have to trim that anyway. I'm more concerned about this area here, removing the felt, because it's has a super thin layer between the felt and the actual meat, so I don't want to cut into that. So that's most of the felt there. That's your felt. Looks kind of translucent a little bit. Very tough connective tissue. Really kind of hard to work with. Tough stuff. But you know, you remove that, and you already have the battle. A lot of butcher shops won't do that. If you see you have some felt on it, just remove when you get home. But the good ones will. Okay. So trimming the fat a bit, you can see I have this thick layer of fat. I tend to like almost sculpt. I just use my knife and I kind of push a little bit. And I see the different layers of fat, and I just kind of allow that to come off, and it flakes off a little bit, and that resolves some of that issue of just having too much fat on your actual roast. Now I will say, you definitely do not want to remove all the fat. If you remove all the fat, you'll find that sometimes your leg dries out a bit. The fat really is nice, especially if you're roasting it or grilling it. It gets nice caramelization, so I tend to really try to stick with that fat being on there. Okay, so trim that little nugget of fat there. Trim that little bit of fat here. I angle my knife downward towards the board as I'm cutting. You can see I've cut all fat off and no meat. It's kind of a little bit, you got to get used to removing that fat there. As you can see now, I've really trimmed down a lot of that fat. I wouldn't take off any more, to be honest. I'd season that aggressively and I'd roast it just like that. Or if I really want to get a boned out leg, several things I can do. There's a couple of lymph nodes in here. They're actually hitting down in here. One is right there. I'm taking my knife and I'm kind of just using that to remove it. And this comes with experience knowing where they're at. So there's 3 of them in here you need to remove. The little nuggets, lymph nodes, they almost look like little sweetbreads. You want to remove those. There's one in here you want to remove. Okay. Now, that little silver skin here on the flank steak, you can definitely take off. I do not cut off the flank steak though. I'll show you why in just a second. So that little silver skin comes off. If you don't take that silver skin off, it can seem tough, especially if that's the first bite you get. Now I keep that flank steak on because when you're actually cooking, this is the tenderloin butt end. That helps to protect it, so when you tie your roast, if you're tying it, you have a nice actual roast to go. Now if you want a whole roasted semi-boneless leg, that's what that looks like. This is about 8 pounds after we removed the H-bone and took off some of the fat. It started off at 10 1/4, so you lose quite a bit of weight on that. Grab my handy dandy butcher twine, and I'm just going to show you what you would do if you were tying this up if you were making a nice semi-boneless lamb roast. So we're going to tie our lamb leg roast. People have asked me how much string, what's the length. I'll be honest, I don't really measure, I just know at this point, but I'll be honest, if I were to eyeball it, I'd say you're starting off with like 7 to 8 feet. You want to make sure that you have more than enough, because it's nothing like getting to the very end and needing more string. So the first thing I'll do is actually lay this down on the table just like this. Move some of this out of the way. I'm laying this down on the table, and I'm actually going to put the upside down I'm gonna lay this across like this, and I'm actually gonna use the string here, and I'm going to start with this, move my finger right here, and then go underneath the whole roast. Then you come up, and there's quite a bit of string, as you can see, and I'm just gonna slightly pull on that to make sure it stays in place. A little simple knot at the end. And I have a nicely tied lamb leg roast. Good for grilling whole, roasting whole. It's gonna allow me to have a nice consistent roast. And you're gonna have different donenesses, which actually helps because you have, medium well here, medium rare, and then a well done. Sometimes people like different textures and different donenesses, so you're good to go. First thing first, if you were gonna be roasting this or grilling it, definitely you always wanna temper your meat. You wanna season it aggressively as it's being tempered. And I would say it's gonna take about an hour and a half to temper this meat. It's a whole leg, it's got a whole bone running through it, so you wanna make sure you give it time to warm up a little bit. Then, after you cooked it, you're gonna let it rest for at least a half an hour to 45 minutes. And then when you actually go to cut it, I tend to cut through this meat because there's no bone. And once I get to the point where I'm at the end of the femoral head, you kind of have a nice even one, I'll stand it up and do nice thin cuts going across here. That's going against the grain. Okay, if you need a recipe, check out our website, salvadorsmarket.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, definitely leave us little comments. We'll read them when we can. We'll get back to you. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us.